Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and after many requests I've decided to update the spreadsheet for healer corruptions because there's been new information. Gushing Wounds have been nerfed, Flash of Insight, it's not looking like it's gonna make it into the corruption vendor, but basically I've decided to make a more concrete list of what I'm going for in terms of healer corruptions for Mythic Plus and raids, and I also added a new tab for raid and Mythic Plus for healers who are looking to get a balanced corruption if they're doing Mythic Plus and raid and they want to kind of have a decent performance in both of that content. So this is like an overall good stats to go for. And generally speaking, again, because of corruption vendors having such a time sensitive frame where you want to have as much information as possible in a quick manner and somewhat accurate, keep in mind that there is a disclaimer that there is a chance that there's going to be new builds emerging. In a month or so, they might be like, oh hey, stacking ineffable is insane for this or whatever. But generally speaking, this should get you through the daunting challenge of trying to decide which corruption to get, because I spent so many hours trying to figure out. So first of all, I'm not going to go through the stat priority because I already did that before. Let's go to DPS Mythic Plus corruption. So you want to achieve a bit of DPS as a healer. And Gushing Wounds has been nerfed, but it's still a very solid option for ranged healers. And why do I say ranged healers? Because ranged healers have much more daunting challenge of using Twilight Devastation. Twilight Devastation can be wasted if you're ranged, especially if you're like a Resto, Shaman, Discipline Priest, Holy Priest. And I also mentioned Upwelling Monk here. I'm assuming that if you play Upwelling Monk, I'm assuming if you play a Monk as a ranged, you don't go into the melee in Mythic Plus, you don't try to DPS. So I'm assuming you play a complete ranged Monk. And that's the Upwelling Monk. And again, Gushing Wounds, Twisted Appendages can be solid choices. Again, you have to mention that Gushing Wounds and Twisted Appendages scale on item level, so they are primary candidates for your Carapace weapon, from your N'Zoth stuff and things like that, because they're 485 item level, and you should strongly consider, if you're doing Mythic Plus and you want to achieve some DPS numbers as a ranged healer, not even ranged healer, any healer, that 485 item could be a prime candidate for your Gushing Wounds. Now, the reason I talk about ranged not using Twilight Devastation, because melee healers have it a lot easier. Twilight Devastation, if you stay in melee at all times, a lot of times you could argue the point it's not going to be wasted. So you have your Restoration Druid, you have your Holy Paladin, you have your Rising Mist, Mistweaver, which I feel is going to be a far more popular option in Mythic Plus at this given point. Twilight Dev is great. Not only it doesn't scale on item level that much, don't get me wrong, the higher item level, the more stamina, the more damage you do, but generally speaking, it's not that item level dependent, and it can do a ton of damage, especially if you consider things like Resto Druid. They're stacking heavy haste amps right now, amplification. The more haste you have, the more abilities you put out, the more chance you have of proccing Twilight Devastation. So I'm willing to bet that a lot of Resto Druids are going to be running at least a couple of tiers of Twilight Devastation. You might argue that, hey, Resto Druid is not a melee healer, but with Cat Weaving, you'll be spending a lot of time in melee, and there is a chance of getting it wasted if you're running out of Cat Weaving or your Cat form, you're running out into range. There is a chance of wasting Twilight Devastation, but generally speaking, from testing, it's still a very good DPS boost for Resto Druids, and it's a no-brainer for Holy Paladin and Rising Mist Monk, who spend all of the time in melee. Let's go for corruptions in raids, and now I have to talk about this. The stat amps gets better the more of the stat you have. Generally speaking, if you have around 30% of a stat, you can consider running stat amplification. So percentage, let's say you have 30%, 35% haste, getting rank 3 expedient, 12% extra of that 35 is going to be insane. Then you're going to get more haste, and these stat amplifications become insanely efficient. They also work with procs. So if you get your Blood White Azeroth haste proc, if you get your Rathian Trinket haste proc, all of a sudden those stat amps also boost them. So you can see that if you're running stat amplifications, you need to make sure that every single piece, or as close as every single piece, has that stat. You want to make sure that you have Azeroth trades that improve those stats or give you procs of those stats. Things like Heart of Darkness are very solid at this point, and trinkets that give you those stats. So we'll talk about that later. And Resto Shaman, again, crit verse, some of the best stats for them. So a lot of the Resto Shamans in raids, I know they're going to be running percentage crit and deadly momentum. Now, deadly momentum and percentage crit feed into each other, so it's good to have a decent balance of it. Again, you want to have a lot of that crit before you're going to start stacking into it. And versatility percentages can be good as well if you have a lot of versatility. Now, when I talk about raid and Mythic Plus, I say verse and crit. So raid and Mythic Plus if you want to have a decent balance. So let's go and have a look at my Restoration Shaman right now. My Resto Shaman's gear is far from perfect, but severe rank 3 is not available yet. So keep in mind, you also want to have rank 3 of a lot of the corruptions available, because you can only basically corrupt 9 pieces, generally speaking. So all of a sudden, if you, for example, as a Holy Paladin, get all Ineffable Truth rank 1s on 9 pieces, later down the weeks, the more corruption you get, you'll start to notice that you can fit in an extra item, but you don't have any more slots. So this is why a lot of the times, maybe Holy Paladin is not the best example, I'll talk about it later on, but generally speaking, this is why you want like Stat Amps, Expedient, Severe, rank 3. I'm reaching 30% crit, very close to it. I'll want to get Severe very soon. Now, if you're running Mythic Plus, Raid, and PvP as Resto Shaman and you want to get a decent set for everything, I think Resto Shaman is a prime candidate for stacking versatility. In PvP, versatility is really strong. In Raids, versatility is very good as well. And in Mythic Plus, I make this argument. If you stack crit as Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus, and you run your Battle Shaman, Igneous Potential stacking, and a lot of people are running this, where your Lava Burst is going to deal more damage. Now, you have to remember the fact that if you have Flame Shock on a target, your Lava Burst is going to crit no matter what your crit chance is. So all of a sudden, you could argue the point that if DPS is really important for you as a Battle Shaman, stacking crit might not be all that great, depending on how much free time you have to DPS, because you won't be able to cast Lava Burst all the time. You'll have to fill in your lightning bolts and things like that. But generally speaking, you could make that argument. You could also make that argument if you're running, and you probably will be running, Spirit of Preservation. Your Healing Surge a lot of the times might actually be already capped in terms of crit, because not only Spirit of Preservation is going to give you extra crit on your Healing Surge, but also Tidal Waves, critical effect chance of your next Healing Surge is also increased. So you could make that argument that even going extra crit is going to be overboard for your Healing Surge and your Lava Burst. So it depends how important it is to deal damage and how much Healing Surges you use as Resto Shaman, and it's probably a lot. So this is why I say that Resto Shaman could be a prime candidate for versatility stacking if Mythic Plus damage is important for you and if you're doing PvP. So consider that right now, depending on which Shaman playstyle you do. So let's go to Discipline Priest, and Discipline Priest hasn't really changed from my previous video. Again, haste and crit are very strong, and a lot of people are going Expedient, haste amps, and crit severe amps as well. So a lot of the times there are certain healers who want to go heavily into one stat, and the Resto Druid is one of the prime examples. But I've seen a lot of Discipline Priests are trying to get a lot of expedience, but they're also trying to keep a good balance of crit. So again, I'm not sure what the perfect balance is right now, but definitely getting Expedient rank 3 and Severe rank 3 is going to be a very solid option if you're unsure about what to do in Mythic Plus and in Raids, and then you can kind of try to figure out what balance you want to do. But generally speaking, haste amplifiers, crit amplifiers, very, very solid for Discipline Priest. If you go to Holy Priest, again, Ineffable Truth, really strong in Raids. You want to have a good balance of Ineffable Truth. This might possibly give you an additional Holy War Salvation, depending on how many you have. If you want to go into other stats, crit amplifiers is good because crit is very good. Mastery amplifiers can be good. If you want to have a decent build for your Holy Priest for Raids and Mythic Plus, I definitely advise Ineffable and crit, because Mastery, if you're going to get Mastery amplifiers, Mastery percentage, in Mythic Plus, it's not going to give you any damage, while crit is going to give you a solid increase in Raids and solid increase in Mythic Plus, because it also increases your damage. So this is why I mentioned Ineffable and crit. If you're just doing Raids, Mastery amplifiers for Holy Priest are pretty excellent as well, depending on how much Mastery you have, depending on how much crit you have as well. It all depends on how much of that stat you have, how many Mastery procs you have from Azeroth and trinkets and things like that. Keep in mind that your neck, things like your neck and your cloak, they don't have versatility. So if you want to start stacking versatility, it might be hard to get to the point where you can start stacking versatility. So you need a lot of versatility, can be dodgy to get. Let's go to Restoration Druids, and this is the healer that I mentioned. Investing into one stat can be very, very solid, and a lot of people are going heavy Expedient builds. We're talking about Expedient after Expedient after Expedient. And I've seen people with 40-50% haste at this point in Mythic Plus and in raid situations. Now, if I were to talk about a Resto Druid that's raiding, I would probably put crit a little bit higher than haste, depending on, do you have crit trinkets or crit proc trinkets? Do you have Brightborn Infusion Azeroth trait. You have Swirling Sands Azeroth trait. These crit buffs and things like that. And the reason I'm not 100% sure about going crazy heavy haste in raids is because I feel like a lot of Resto Druids who do that will just end up having a lot of mana issues. If you're farming content right now and you're killing bosses in 3 minutes, going extreme amount of haste in raids is probably going to be a good way to get better logs. But if you're progressing in boss and mana is going to be a big issue, you might just end up overusing your rejuvenation because the global cooldown is going to be so low because you have like 40% haste, and you might be like, where did my mana go? So I would be very careful about going heavy haste as a Resto Druid who's not experienced with mana management. But if you are experienced, going heavy haste can be very, very, very solid. This is why I say that Raid and Mythic Plus gear, going heavy haste is going to be the best, because heavy haste in Mythic Plus is super solid because it's good for healing and good for DPS, but you need to have a good balance of mastery. Now let's go look at my Resto Druid stats that I've spent years trying to figure out. So this is my Resto Druid stat build that I'm experimenting with right now, and this is quite heavy haste. I have around 19% mastery. Now this is the thing for Resto Druids in Mythic Plus. You need to have enough mastery to heal. What is enough mastery to heal? You tell me. On certain affixes, you can probably get away with low amount of mastery. On heavy healing affixes, you probably want to stack mastery. So I'm trying around 19% right now, but I also have things like Inside the Pack proc. I also have Honed Mind proc as well. I'm running Twilight Devastation rank 2, and I also have Gushing Wounds. Now, the fact is that I also have Rathian Trinket for haste. That's going to be increased by my haste amplifier's expedient. I can also make a very solid choice of getting Vita Charged Titan Shard, because this is not only going to give me haste, but it's also going to give me a haste proc that's also going to scale with expedient. So all of a sudden, I could make a solid choice for using these trinkets, for trying to get as much haste on every single piece of my gear. Also the fact there are shoulders, there are Biz Sanguine Monstrosity shoulders that give you Blood Rite proc, that gives you a lot of haste. That's also a very solid choice. So you can see that if you're going into one stat amplification, you want to try and have nearly every single piece of gear with haste on it. You want to try and get haste procs from Azeroth. You want to try and get haste procs from trinkets. Things like Heart of Darkness can be very solid because they give you stats to all of your secondaries, including haste. So this is what I'm talking about. If you invest everything into a single stat, you want to make sure you get as many procs of that stat from your other type of gear. Now let's go to Holy Paladin. And Holy Paladin, I already made a separate video about it, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But Ineffable Truth, stacking, and I put a lot. What is a lot? There is still people figuring out what is the best way of doing it. Some people say get as much as you can. Some people just want to get 3 rank 1 ineffables, which is going to give you 90% cooldown reduction. Some people like me have been experimenting with 6, 5 or 7 ranks of ineffable, which puts me at around 150, 180 cooldown reduction. And at that point, with the haste that I have, when ineffable procs, when wings proc, I'm able to do Holy Shock, Holy Shock, Holy Shock, Holy Shock without having to wait too much for the global cooldown. It feels very smooth. So I feel that's a good breakpoint for me. But generally speaking, you can go with a lot of ways. Go full ineffable stacking, or get a decent amount of comfortable levels of ineffable, and then I put haste and mastery in asterisks here for a specific reason. And hear me out, this is my predictions for some builds for certain raid bosses. So let's go to my Holy Paladin stats right now. So this is my Holy Paladin gear in raid situations, and I'm running 6 ineffable truths, which puts me at 180 cooldown reduction, which when my wings procs and ineffable truth proc, I have very smooth Holy Shock transition because I have a lot of haste as well and things like that. But generally speaking, I also have Honed Mind and Racing Pulse. Now, I feel that in the future, Holy Paladins are either gonna go full ineffable stacking, or they're going to go comfortable levels of ineffable stacking, and then they're gonna try go for stats. So what stats are you gonna go for? There is a argument to be made about heavily investing into a certain stat. So for example, look at this. I am running 2 Avenger's Might at this given point. While Avenging Wrath is active, your mastery is increased by a certain amount. I'm running 2 of these. Why am I running 2 of these? Because with Ineffable, I can achieve, and I've checked this, I was able to achieve around 50% uptime on wings. I could probably get that to 60, maybe 70 if I really heavily invested into Ineffable. So if I have like 60% uptime of wings, that means for 60% of the time, I'm able to go from 32% mastery to 69% mastery. This is insane with this trait. I feel this trait is going to climb in value. You could also argue that Heart of Darkness could be decent as well, but we'll have to see. For fights like Mod, where you're all stacked, for fights where you're stacked, I feel there's going to be meme builds appearing where maybe you're going to get, like, for example, let's say you get 6 or 7 ineffables, and then maybe you get Honed Mind, or maybe you don't get Honed Mind, you get Masterful. Maybe you're going to go Mimi and get Masterful, and during the heavy healing part of Mod, you're going to proc your wings, you're gonna get double Avenger's Might here, with insane amount of mastery. And then because you have Masterful, and Masterful is going to scale so well because you have so much mastery at that given point, you're going to be healing for so much. So that might be a meme build for people who want to get good logs on Mod. Now I feel like for fights where people are not stacked, you might be considering running a little bit more haste, because haste is so good for Holy Paladin. You'll be running, like, look, a lot of the times you'll be running 30, 35 or things like that. Maybe investing into a expedient or one rank 3 expedient might be actually a solid choice. Or maybe going Void Ritual is going to be a solid choice. So generally speaking, it's all up to debate right now. I feel for me, going 6 or 7 ineffables is good. And then for fights where they're stacked, going with haste, going with mastery is going to be very solid. And for fights where you're not stacked, going with either stats like Void Ritual or going with haste like Racing Pulse or even Expedient. Again, people might just go heavy ineffable stack. And if I were to talk about a good build for Raid and Mythic Plus, if you want to optimize for both of those type of contents, Ineffable is good for Mythic Plus as well. A good amount of stacking on it is pretty nice. Again, I mentioned, some people like to get 3, some people like to stack a full amount, but you also have to optimize some of your crit gear for Mythic Plus, because crit is a lot more important in Mythic Plus. So you will be sacrificing some throughput if you want to optimize for Mythic Plus and raids. Like if you're optimizing for Mythic Plus, you might consider running Severe, you might be consider running Strike Through in order to help with your healing as a Holy Paladin. So if you're running raid, you'll be having a different priority than when you're running Mythic Plus Holy Paladin. So now let's move on to Upwelling Monk, and my Upwelling Monk is really happy with the amount of gear that I got, and generally speaking, crit amplifiers and burst amplifiers are the #1 choice. I'm going to be running crit amplifiers because look at my Mistweaver's Upwelling gear, and this is a thing of beauty. So I don't have any severe pieces at this given point, but I'm running at 32% crit, and this is a very good breakpoint, a very good stats to start stacking severe and things like that. So I'm waiting for severe rank 3 to pop up, but you also have to look at my corruption. I have 2 deadly momentums right now. I have 2 deadly momentums. Severe and deadly momentums can work really well together. Also the fact that, look at my crit procs that I have. I have Conch that gives you crit. I have Swirling Sands, and this is what I've been talking about, Swirling Sands all day, gives you a crit proc. I have Brightborn Infusion, gives you an independent crit proc. So I have 2 independent crit procs. I have a 3rd independent crit proc from my Conch. I also have Secret Infusion that I'm running 2 of right now. And for anyone who plays Mistweaver Monk, they know that if I pop my Thunder Focus Tea and if I cast my Enveloping Mist, I get a good amount of crit. So I'm still not sure if I will be running triple Secret Infusion because I have that option. I have an option of running triple Secret Infusion, getting more crit from my Thunder Focus Tea when I go into Enveloping Mist. But I'm also considering running Uplifted Spirits because the Vivify heals for an additional amount, and critical heals reduce the cooldown of Revival. So if I have a lot of crit, there is, Vivify is going to crit all the time and my Revival cooldown is going to be reduced. I'm not sure if this is going to be worth it, but I'm experimenting with this right now. Otherwise, I'm going to be running with triple Secret Infusion, my crit, trinkets, my Swirling Sands, my Brightborn Infusion, my Severes, my Deadly Momentum, and I'm going to be swimming in crit, and I cannot wait to try out my Mistweaver, Upwelling Mistweaver in raid situations and in Mythic Plus to see how much damage and healing I can do. Now in terms of Rising Mist, Mistweaver Monk, honestly the stats, they're somewhat equal in a lot of ways, and I put in get a few Ineffable Truths. Ineffable Truth is very solid for Rising Mist, but stacking it is not advisable. No one is advising to stack your Ineffable Truth. You won't be stacking Ineffable Truth like you stack it on Holy Paladin. I think a couple of ones might be a good breakpoint. I'm still not 100% sure. And then in terms of other stuff for raids, Honestly, if you have a lot of crit, you can consider running, you know, severe and things like that. If you have a lot of verse, if you have a lot of haste might have a certain breakpoint, which I'm not 100% sure on yet. But this is why I put in Raid and Mythic Plus as a Rising Mist Monk. Get a few ineffables and then honestly any stat except for Mastery, because Mastery is going to have less of impact in Mythic Plus and in Raids, especially in Mythic Plus because it doesn't know damage, and in Raids it usually has less of an impact than haste, crit, or verse. So this is why I say, I could say this for Rising Mist right now. Ineffables, couple ineffables, and then any stat, with Mastery being the lowest priority on this. So this has been my video now. I know it's very long. Disclaimer, things can change. Like Gushing Wound was nerfed. I don't know if anything else is gonna get nerfed. If it is, I'm gonna make another 20-minute video. And I hope you guys are not gonna hate me for it. But I wanted to include a more specific list of what I'm going for. Things can change, the values and the builds are still emerging, but because of the time sensitive issue that Corrupted Vendor brings, I feel this is a good overview of what's going to give you a decent increase to your healer, especially if you're trying to optimize between Raid and Mythic Plus, or maybe Raid specifically, or Mythic Plus specifically, or damage specifically. Let me know, guys. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know if I missed out on something, and I'll see you in my next guide.